One of my favorite questions to ask people to get to know them better is, what are 5 albums that shaped your musical journey, or 5 albums that changed your life? It's a fun question because it's kind of open to interpretation. You know, this isn't your 5 favorite albums. It's not the 5 albums you think are the best ever made. It's 5 albums that had a deep, lasting impact on you in some way. And I figured, since I'm just starting out this channel, I should probably give you my 5. That way you can kind of know me better, know where I'm coming from in my own personal musical journey. So these are the 5 albums that shaped my musical life. So growing up, my family was never really big into music. My parents had the bands that they loved, typically a lot of like soft rock type stuff, but everyone around me in my family, in my school, in my community were mostly listening to Christian contemporary music or worship music, and I never really cared for that, still don't. So I just kind of didn't care about music. It wasn't really something I was interested in. I didn't understand the point or appeal of it. But that all changed with this first album. My brother, who is like 4 years older than me, he heard a song in a movie. This was when I was probably 11 or 12, and he fell in love with that song. And this was pre-Shazam. This was pre-smartphones. This was, you had to try and remember a lyric and then Google it when you were able to hook up your dial-up internet. This was that era. So he narrowed the song down to 2 bands who both played the same style of music and both had a song with this title. He wasn't sure which band it was because he didn't really know either of them all that well. Keep in mind, we weren't a musical family. So one day he took me and we went to Walmart, and he just decided, going to buy both of these albums. He found them both and he didn't know which one it was, and he's like, I'm going to buy both of these, but I'm going to keep one for myself and I'm going to give you the other one. So the 2 albums that were in contention were Blink-182's Enema of the State, and then this album, The Young and the Hopeless by Good Charlotte. He kept Enema of the State, and he gave me Young and the Hopeless. And the song that he was looking for was Anthem, which was the Good Charlotte version. But I think he decided to keep Blink-182 maybe because the whole kind of like punk aesthetic that Good Charlotte had felt a little bit cringy to him at the time, or was a little bit intimidating, or I mean, if you know Enema of the State and Teenage Boys, you might understand why he would want to keep that album cover over Good Charlotte. But either way, I ended up with Good Charlotte, and it kind of changed my life. This was the first album that I loved. It was the first album that I memorized every word to. It was the first album that just kind of made me understand what music can mean to people and what it could be and what it can do. It started just this train of loving albums that hasn't really stopped. This album just really made me understand music. It really made me see the point of it and fall in love with it. And pretty much since this album, and since falling in love with this album, music has been a massive part of my life ever since. It led me to studying music in college, because that was the only thing I could think of at 17 years old that I would want to do for the rest of my life. So I owe a lot to this album, and this was Good Charlotte's second album. It was the one that kind of like skyrocketed them out of the more underground scene into kind of more that mall punk mainstream that was going on in the early and mid 2000s. Had massive hits like The Anthem, like Boys and Girls, like Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous. It just, there's a lot on it. Very emotional album. It can be a little bit cringy at times. Even when I was first listening to it, I was thinking like, man, I feel a little bit too old for some of these songs, and I was like 12. So it's got a little bit of that Simple Plan type vibe to it, but again, not one of my favorite albums. It's not one that I listen to a ton, but it made a deep, lasting impact on me, and it's definitely one of the albums that changed my life. So we fast forward a couple years, and that same brother who bought me Young and the Hopeless is now at college, and he's 4 years older than me. So his freshman year of college was my freshman year of high school. And then somehow through visiting him or social media or however it happened, a few of his close college friends kind of became friendly with me as well. Maybe they just took pity on this poor little high school kid. I don't know, but they started talking with me, and I would hang out with them when I would go visit my brother. So one of them in particular, her name's Kayla. I doubt she's watching this, but hey, if you are, she kind of realized that we had the same style of music. We liked the same kind of stuff. It's just she knew a whole lot more than I did. So she would make a couple mix CDs for me and my other brother, who's only 1 year older than me. And she would send them back with my oldest brother, and he would come back with CDs just full of pop punk classics, like The Main, All Time Low, all of these type of like slightly more obscure at the time pop punk bands that weren't like Fall Out Boy and Paramore and, you know, Simple Plan and Blink, you know, they were, or Green Day. They were a little bit more not known unless you were in the scene. And I listened to these and I loved this music, but there was one band on one of these CDs that really stuck out to me. And then I just started listening to everything that that band had put out, which wasn't a ton at the time, and fell in love with their debut LP, which was called A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade. I said a lot about how Good Charlotte, the Young and the Hopeless kind of made me understand what music could mean to people, but this made me feel it in a whole different way. I mean, I'm sure we can all remember being a freshman in high school or in 8th grade and just feeling like no one really understands you, feeling like you're feeling heartbreak and heartache and angst for the first time, and you're looking around and you're saying, like, none of these people get it. No one knows what it's like to be me. No one understands these things I'm going through. I'm the first person to ever feel this. And we can look back now and think that that's kind of silly, but at the time, those emotions are real and they're powerful and they're hard. And it just really can't be overstated how important it is in those moments to feel like someone gets you and someone understands you and someone knows what you're going through. And this album, A Lesson in Romantics, just kind of put to song exactly what I was feeling in a lot of those cases. I could listen to these songs and just think like, man, I'm not alone. These people get it. These people have been here. They know what I'm going through. And just put it on and just boil in my teenage angst is what this album did for me. So it's kind of the one that showed me how meaningful and impactful music can be for people. And I mean, I think that's just that's something that everyone who is a music fan learns at one point or another. You just get so attached to an album, and this was mine, A Lesson in Romantics by Mayday Parade. That's the second album that changed my life. The third album's a little bit different. It's not teenage angst pop punk, so some of you might be grateful for that, but it is also an artist who is probably equally as made fun of. When I was in high school a few years after Mayday Parade, somehow it was either through a friend or my dad got me listening to Piano Man by Billy Joel. So I heard this album, The Stranger, and it blew me away. And at the time, I had that kind of like teenage mindset that I think we've all had at some point, or like, why would I bother listening to older bands like this? They don't get it. This new music is so much better. And hearing this album and just hearing how good it is and how good the songs are on it, it just opened me up to the world of musical history. It opened me up to these great bands from the 70s and 80s and before. And as you can probably tell by now, if you've watched any other content on this channel, I'm a big music history fan. And I think Billy Joel and The Stranger in particular was kind of my gateway into that understanding of musical history and how important it was and how good a lot of it is. So for that, very thankful to Billy Joel and The Stranger for that. So the fourth album that changed my life probably came around the same time that I was introduced to Billy Joel. I don't have the vinyl, unfortunately. I can't find it. So if anyone can, let me know. I'm in the market. And that's A Day to Remember's Homesick. This album, I remember listening to a couple of A Day to Remember songs on a field trip. My friend had a couple songs on his iPod. I think it was If It Means a Lot to You and Monument. And we were in a bus ride up to Washington, D.C., and I just listened to those songs basically on repeat the whole time and fell in love with A Day to Remember. And then Homesick came out, and that album was so good. It's still so good. I don't listen to it a ton anymore, but I would if I thought about it. It's great. Larry, I'm Made of Wax is on there. If It Means a Lot to You, like it's such a good album. And that album kind of brought in my perspectives out of this kind of like mall punk, pop punk scene into a little bit harder and heavier stuff. I was probably a little bit intimidated by screamed vocals until A Day to Remember. And I might have been introduced through some other bands. I'm not saying A Day to Remember was my one chance. Maybe Under Oath or Atreyu would have done it, but A Day to Remember was the gateway for me. It really pushed me into more of like a metalcore or a hardcore or a screamo or whatever you want to call it. And some of my favorite albums are from that genre now. So I owe a lot to A Day to Remember for kind of introducing me to that whole scene. I'm wearing their shirt right now. I actually just saw that, so that's cool. I saw their acoustic tour a few months ago. It was great. Never thought I would enjoy A Day to Remember acoustic, but it was amazing. So that was the fourth album that changed my life. So we're on to the last one. And this album I first heard when I was in college. I heard a tiny snippet, like maybe 3 words from one song. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I need to figure out who this is. And it took me a while, but I figured out the song and the album it was on, and it was different for me. It was something different for me. And that album was This Modern Glitch by the Wombats. The song I had heard off this album was Technofan. I heard like the first like East London's Not a Bomb Site is the lyrics I heard, and just kind of needed to learn more about that band. But This Modern Glitch, in college, probably around my sophomore year of college, I was starting to move out of that like hardcore and pop punk style. I still enjoyed it, but it like, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to broaden my perspectives a little bit. So this album got me interested into more indie rock and indie pop, and it just opened my horizons to so much more music out there that is incredible. And the Wombats, this album is still one of my favorite albums of all time. It's either 1 or 2 depending on the day. I don't think it's their best album. Like, I think Beautiful People Will Ruin Your Life is a better album. I think even the one they just released last year, Change Yourself, Not the World, is better. But this one just holds a special place in my heart because it's like the first indie pop, indie rock record that I fell in love with. And the Wombats are still probably my favorite band of all time. So this album changed my life, and I think it just kind of carries on that theme of broadening my perspectives, right? Like the first 2 albums introduced me to music and broadened my ideas of what it could be and what it could mean to people and what it could do. And then Billy Joel and A Day to Remember and the Wombats opened me up to just different avenues of music and just kind of showed me that you don't have to stay where you're at. There's great music all over the place. So I think that's the running theme of my 5. So I'm definitely curious. Let me know what your 5 are in the comments. Let me know if we match up, if you also loved any of these albums when you were younger. Yeah, I'd love to hear it. So those are the 5 albums that changed my life.